some of your cohorts participated this morning in a meeting. It is important that we recognize their achievement. And so I want to share with you guys some wonderful news. Congratulations to Dale Williams Jr. and Brian Pickens, as they are the winners of the CSU WRBL TV scholarships. So big round of applause and audio.
Congratulations. Good job.
You guys have been doing great work in the class, and obviously you've distinguished yourself at CSU, and so they are two of the six winners of the CSU scholarships that we started. And so you guys should be very proud of your achievement, and we're just lucky to have you in the cohort with us, and I'm excited about you guys going into media. So it's appropriate. And, you're so welcome. You guys have done great work, and so we're just glad to have you in the class. And again, congratulations, and so glad that WRBL could play a part in recognizing the achievements you guys have made so far. So again, awesome job, guys.
Thanks.
Congrats, guys.
Congratulations.
Yeah, great job.
Thank you.
And there's a total of 6 winners, and so Dale and Brian were recipients of 2 of the 6 winners today. So we're proud of all of them, but especially proud of Brian and Dale being in the class with us. So for today's meeting, I thought what I would do is answer some of the questions you all have given to me, put forth at various times in emails, on calls, and also included in your learning goals. And so we're going to do a little bit of theory today, and we're going to dive a little deep, but we're going to relate it specifically to storytelling and the exercises that you're currently engaged in. So I would recommend you get a notebook and a piece of paper and jot notes. We are going to be recording this call. It is recording right now. And we're posting it later, but it would be wise to go ahead and jot some notes down in outline so we can follow along. So I promise you, although some of this will seem a little bit in the atmosphere and theoretical, I will circle back around and give you specific examples, and I think it will address 6 or 7 kinds of different questions that we've gotten at various points, either in our classwork, in emails from you guys, in our one-on-one chats, in our conversations previous to the course starting. And I think this will give you a foundation. It's the appropriate time in our work together to ask these kinds of questions, because we've been doing exercises which have gotten us used to the building blocks of storytelling and what goes into them visually, audio, and we've started to touch on things that are underneath the visual representations of that. And so we're today going to dig a little deeper down into the guts of what motivates a story and the people that are in a story, and learn a little bit about what makes a story, what motivates the people in a story, and how actors in a story or players in a story might typically be motivated to take action, or what might prompt them to do so, and how they might take action. And if you know some of those keys about what motivates people to take action in respect to this context, then you might be able to anticipate. And also the key here is for you to be always asking the why question. You see an actor or a player in a story take some action or do something, and then you ask yourself, okay, why did they do that, or what is motivating to them to do that? And that will enable you then to know what the next and the next and the next question is, so you can find out exactly what's going on and why it's happening. And so let's start with a question that many of you have asked: where do stories come from? Okay, now in a general sense, they come from all around us. You all have been engaged in telling stories, and a lot of those stories have come from right inside your own home, in your kitchen, in your living room, in your bedroom, in your garage, in your front yard. So there are stories all around you, yourself, the people you love, the people you live with, and so they're at home. Extend outward. Some of you have gone out into your neighborhood. There are stories in your neighborhood right down the street from you, next door. So extend even wider. Some of you have gone out into the community in your city, your state, and the country, and of course the planet as a whole. There's stories all around us. And that gets really big. And how do you identify a good story in that context? And how do you decide if that story is the right one for you to tell or the right one for your audience? So then you kind of return maybe a little bit closer to home and realize, well, in the context of other kinds of organizations, there are stories that are specific to those people's interests, and those would occur in your school. You've done some of those about fellow students who've been affected by COVID-19. And so it's good to remember that in the context of your school, there are specific stories which matter to yourself, your fellow students, administrators, faculty, parents, alumni, and so forth. The same would apply to other organizations and institutions like a church. There are certain kinds of stories that come out of that, or there are certain players in a church which might act on other stories. Government. We do a lot of government stories in our work as journalists. Governments have power, they control a lot of money. The things that governments do and the actions that players within governments do have a lot of effect on people. And so justifiably, one of our missions as journalists is to hold the powerful accountable. And some of the most powerful people in our society are the people who are elected and or appointed and or serve in an administrative capacity in government. And then there are groups. There are groups which may have official recognition or not official recognition. They may be formal, they may be informal. It could be the Girl Scouts, it could be Antifa, it could be Black Lives Matter. You know, these are groups that affiliate, and although they may not have any kind of, legal charter or status, they affiliate around a common purpose, a common issue, or a common mission. And then there are other people. These are more granular, more really focused stories where, there is a specific person that is engaged in a specific thing. And one of the reasons I draw your attention to this is, although as you look at this list and you realize that there are stories that are very specific to what's going on in your life, in your house, at the top of that list right there, home, and there are stories which affect everybody on the planet, when you go to tell a story, you always have to circle back around and realize that you can't really tell the story of a planet-wide issue and have it have the same kind of impact or interest unless you have a person who is the star of your story to illustrate the larger issue. So just remember, no matter how small or how big your story is, usually your story is told most effectively if you find a person who is relatable, whom the story can be told through. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So then we ask, where do interesting stories come from? Because if you are, in your home and you're doing a story about cooking an egg, that would have a certain amount of interest for some people, the people who know the person cooking the egg, the people who are into cooking, the people who may know you and don't know the subject of your story and just want to watch that story because they know you and they want to see what you're up to. But the definition of interesting also has application in terms of the number of people who might be interested in it and the number of people it might affect and the stakes of that story. What's at risk? How many people might it affect? How many people might it benefit? So there are other ways to define what makes an interesting story. And usually an interesting story is often defined by conflict. Someone wants something and another someone opposes that individual. And so right in the middle there is the conflict. And in conflict, we have drama, we have stakes, winners, losers, and we have action taken to achieve the goal, to thwart the goal. the protagonist, the antagonist, the hero, the villain. The quest is in the middle, and the ultimate gaining of the quest. And in that interaction between those two, we have conflict. And conflict is not always a negative thing. Conflict could be fun. Conflict could be a high school debate competition where no one's really out to get anybody, but someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, right? It could be a football game. You know, if the game is played well and people are protected and they have the proper equipment to shield them from blows and strikes, in a football game, no one's going to get seriously injured, and no one really wants anyone to get seriously injured, but someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. There's conflict in that 60 minutes of the game. And so we ask, you know, where does conflict exist? Well, for humans, conflict, again, exists in the middle between two opposing forces. And there are three, generally speaking, in classical story definition, there are three areas where conflict exists. It is the person in conflict with themselves. It is the person at war with themselves. It is their person in quandary with themselves. Between my ears, my brain, and inside my heart and my emotions, myself, my soul, I wrestle. All of us do. We all wrestle with these things. Could I be better? Could I do better? Am I good enough? Am I strong enough? Am I beautiful enough? Am I loved enough? Am I doing well in the world? Does my life, you know, amount to something? So we ask these questions of ourselves, and it's hard to illustrate those kinds of conflicts. You know, these are not typically things which you can actually approach as a story, a visual story, and really effectively and adequately show this internal struggle which is occurring within people, right? Most often what we do is we are able to peek into the inner life of someone wrestling with themselves when their actions manifest that struggle in an outward way. And sometimes we get to the next level here. It's an action of a person against another person, right? So a person is going through an inner turmoil and they can't come to terms with it. And so they act in an outward manner, and that action affects another person, right? So the second level of conflict is between a person and a person, right? So that's most often where the stories we do take place. It is this interaction of people, and then if groups of people band together, this group of people wants to do something, this other group of people wants to stop it. The conflict in the middle is that outer conflict, which is motivated by what's going on in someone's heart and head. But to see it and to capture video of it, it's got to be on the outside, and it's got to be in action where it takes place, right? And then there's the higher level issue. It's not so much about me wrestling with myself, right? Or a person wrestling with themselves. There's the universal conflict, which is really humanity versus death. We all have a finite time on this planet. We all want our actions to amount to something. We all want our life to have meaning. And so those conflicts and those actions in that middle part there are sometimes demonstrations of a person or a group of people's effort to find meaning in life and or to make their lives and the lives of others better. So it's the universal conflict that's going on there. You know the clock is ticking. You've got a certain number of years on this earth. In the end, what kind of an impact will you have on other people, positively or negative, on those you love? And will you personally have created an existence which has meaning when the clock runs out? So this is a little philosophical, but if you understand that there are many levels, which it might be someone who's convicted of embezzling money from a business. But if you remember that that person is dealing with inner conflict, universal conflict, and they've manifested their actions, in this case, criminal or wrongdoing, in an outer action. But there are many layers to why someone might do what they might do. And we just need to remind ourselves of that as we progress through a story and we think about identifying the players in stories, identifying their motivations, and questioning the action they take as a result of their motivations, because therein lies not only the mechanics of the story and the who, what, when, where, why, how, but also, importantly, the why of the story. It's so hard to get to the why of the story. So where does conflict exist typically in your stories, right? It could be a person versus a person. That's simply, you have some money, I want your money, here's a gun, give me your money, right? It's one person versus one person, right? It could be, I have an idea and I believe this thing and you don't believe it, and so we argue. And that fight could be physical fight, that could be a fight of words, it could be a discussion, right? It could, again, could be a group. It could be Georgia versus Alabama, Auburn versus Alabama, Auburn versus Georgia. You know, it is a group of people who've banded together versus another group of people. So conflict exists between two groups of people. It could be issues, right? So the issue over here might be clean drinking water for the city of Flint, Michigan. Everybody deserves clean drinking water, right? The opposing issue over here is a utility and government and private interests who don't want to spend the money that it takes to deliver clean water to the residents of that city. So they're making a choice for profit, expedience, and power in terms of the allocation of those resources over the needs of the residents of that city for clean drinking water. Does that make sense? So issue opposes issue. And sometimes in the middle, an illustration of that would be a fight over resources. Enough water for farmers in the West versus piping that water out of the drier areas of the Western US to the coast in California, so high dollar golf courses can water their golf courses. I mean, that's a simplistic view, but you get the idea. Fights over resources are common in the stories we cover. And sometimes it's issue versus issue. Then it could be idea versus idea, right? And sometimes that conflict is illustrated in a vow for attention, right? So global warming, that's a big, huge idea which has a lot at stake, right? And many people are trying to get people to pay attention to that issue. But there are other ideas out there that are more pressing and more popular, frankly, and those ideas are winning the conflict for attention over something that is important, but nevertheless, many people put on the back burner. It also, you know, this could be religion, right? I'm a Catholic, you're a Baptist. I'm a Buddhist, you're Hindu. These are ideas that then spring forth and motivate how people do what they do and how they live their lives and what they believe. But at their core, there are two different ideas and beliefs about how the world works and should work. And so they vie for attention, right? Sometimes it's not so much there's a person versus a person, or a group versus a group, or an issue versus an issue. Sometimes stuff just goes wrong. An event happens, an earthquake, a hurricane, a volcano, a tsunami, right? So an event happens, and that event versus people. So the conflict we often find in the middle there that we usually respond to and cover is the response to the event. And it could be something heroic, someone saving someone's life in a dramatic way because of this event of nature, which no one has control over, but as humans, we must respond to survive and thrive. It could be something venal. After a hurricane, people price gouging to try to rip people off, charging $10 for a bottle of water for people that are in desperate need, right? People that make the rounds of those neighborhoods and say, let me fix your roof. Give me a $5,000 deposit. And someone gives them $5,000 to fix their roof after a big storm, and then they just pocket the money and drive off, right? So big events like that prompt a response from people, and we find a conflict, not so much with the people trying to beat the event. You can't really beat a volcano or a tsunami, but you can beat the results of that event, which you have no control over, or you can try to make things better for the others. So these are areas which we commonly find conflict, and some examples that I pointed out of kinds of stories we might respond to as those conflicts occur. Who are the players in stories? Again, it could be a person, that's an individual. It could be a judge, an attorney, a defendant, a witness, a police officer. It could be a group. It could be, Antifa. Could be a group of that's out there. It could be an organization. An organization has a little bit more structure to it. It has some governance that it goes by. An organization might be the United Way. Okay. It has some rules that it lives by. An institution. An institution, I put this up there because it's slightly different than an organization. It has a little bit more formality to it. It may have some governmental sanction or assistance. A library, a art gallery, things like that. A business, an organization which is motivated by profit. Obviously, you mentioned government, city, county, state, national, quasi-governmental organizations like public utilities, which straddle the line sometimes between governmental and organizations and private interests and institutional kinds of things. And then you have coalitions. Sometimes people and groups and organizations and institutions and businesses and government have aligned interests, and so they'll get together. Bill Gates and Warren Buffett might say, we got a bunch of money and we can't spend it all, so we're going to form this organization between the two of us and other rich people, and we're going to bring in this think tank, and we're going to bring in these nonprofits, and we're going to bring in some of these organizational, institution, business, and governmental individuals, and we're going to form this coalition and decide how to spend some of this money to improve literacy, bring more clean drinking water around the world. So sometimes individuals, groups, or the whole organization of any one of these kinds of players will unite in a coalition. The other thing I want to point out to you is sometimes there's not forethought, there's not logical motivation. Sometimes the mob rules. Sometimes there is no organization, there is no goal, and yet people get together and they're in proximity to each other, and something kicks something off. Could be fear, and that group will act in a way that an individual might not act, or a group with cooler heads might not act, and you have things happen like Salem, Massachusetts, and women being burned at the stake for being witches. No logical explanation, right? No truth, fear, superstition, twisted religious motives, and all kinds of other stuff come together, and something takes over in groupthink, and the mob acts, and it have good consequences, a flash mob, and then it cheers somebody up and does something cool, right? That's more organized, I guess, but and it could be something dire. So sometimes groups of people don't act with forethought and logic, and it's not necessarily that every person in that group is motivated by malice or anything else. It's something takes over and ignites, and things start happening, and then they just spiral out of control. So just be aware of that. So what might motivate the players in stories? The players in stories can be motivated by a lot of different things, including but not limited to fear. The most basic level of that is, I don't want to die. I want to live. In your reptilian brain that's been trained for millions of years, way back in there, where you don't even think about it, there are certain things we do as humans which are completely wired into us where we don't have to think about it. Some of that stuff is evident in the stories we do and the way people react to the stories we do. For instance, there's one thing that's apparent for humans. Humans often react to the brightest object in their visual field of view, right? So if I'm looking out on a vista and it's just a field, it's a wheat field, and I see a bright flash of light in the wheat field, instinctively I react, and first of all, my eyes notice that because of the contrast and the brightness, and then I immediately ask a survival question: what is that, and could it hurt me? That's just a basic primal thing that we all do, right? But as creators of content on a television or a computer screen, we remember that. So if you want something to stand out in the frame on a graphic or in a visual or in a piece of video, just remember, when you capture it, whatever the brightest thing in that frame is, that's what the human's eye is going to be drawn to immediately, right? The other thing that humans are drawn to is movement. So same wheat field, I'm looking out at the wheat field, there's no wind. It's really quiet. I might hear some crickets, right? But all of a sudden, 50 yards away, I see the tops of the grass stalks start to move, and that movement is slowly coming toward me. Does anybody want to guess where my mind might go? Is a lion coming through the grass about to eat me? Right? So movement is one of the other things that people react to. And again, this is primal, and part of it is based on survival instinct. And so fear might be a motivation, and fear motivates itself manifests itself in other ways too, right? Greed might motivate someone. You know the phrase, follow the money, right? And this is a big one for you to remember, because if you're wondering why someone might be engaged in something that is not right or might be even criminal, if you start asking about, well, what's their motivation, and you take it a step further because you suspect, because it's in a business context, it's probably money. Who's making money off of this thing? Who stands the most to gain? Greed is a motivator. Sometimes people don't act out of instinct, and they don't act out of forethought. They act out of ignorance. They do things and they think their actions are going to be okay, or just benign, or maybe even beneficial, but they're acting out of ignorance. And what I mean is they don't have all the information they need to be able to make a good decision about how to act. So they see an alarm bell going off on a control panel, and they think, oh, I better turn that knob down, and that will stop that alarm bell from going off, because I don't want anything bad to happen. But what they don't realize is if they run over there and they turn that valve off, then pressure just continues to build in the system, and that gas plant explodes and kills them and the other workers and destroys a neighborhood because they just didn't know. They tried to be helpful, but they didn't have enough information. So not everyone acts out of fear or greed. Sometimes they act because they don't know any better, and it produces good results or bad results, but sometimes bad results. Sometimes people do know, they just don't care. Ambivalence. I know it could be bad. I don't care. Not my job. I'm not going to deal with that, right? So sometimes it's ambivalence. Sometimes it's emotion. I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just so darn mad right now. I'm going to act and someone's going to pay. So they are not ruling their emotions. Their emotions are ruling them. Emotions could be a motivator. And then, you know, there are some moments there where we do some stories and we're just blown away and it brings a tear to your eye and you're thinking, man, people are awesome. Sometimes people act out of altruism. They know that what they do could come at a cost to themselves, but they know it's the right thing and they choose to do it. And it's an amazing moment if you can do stories like that and capture stories like that. Sometimes people do act for the greater good, regardless of consequence to themselves. Those are some of the motivations that players in a story might have. So how might a player in a story take action based on that motivation? I hinted at some of this before. And the big question you need to ask in a situation like this is, the player might be contemplating, if I take this action, at what cost to you and what benefit to me? Am I going to win? Are you going to lose? It could be win-win. It could be lose-lose. Sometimes people act out of malice. They're not really going to benefit a lot. They just don't want you to win. So they're going to act accordingly to make sure you lose, even if they're not going to win. They act maliciously. Sometimes people act recklessly. I don't care. I like to party. I'm going to drink and I'm going to drive. And I don't care if I kill anybody. They don't care about what the consequence is for other people. They may not even care what the consequence is to themselves. They act recklessly. And in legal terms, in laws, you'll actually see written in laws and charges, these words, malice and reckless. You'll see that written in laws. It's how a person acted when they did something. And in this case, if it's a law that somebody's been arrested on something for, then it's a degree usually that they act with malice, recklessness, or forethought, right? Apathy. Sometimes they don't act. They don't, it's not that they're acting, they just don't act. They know if I did this, it would make this better. I'm just not going to do it. It's too much trouble. So something will go wrong or something will be allowed to continue, which is not good, but they don't care. Not my job. It's too much trouble for me, right? Sometimes people will act out of generosity, right? It's not a high cost to me. I have this little extra here. I see someone who might be in need. I'm going to, there's no real benefit to me, but there's no high cost to me. So I'm going to take this little extra that I have and I'm going to bundle it up and I'm going to donate it or I'm going to pass it on because I know that could better someone's life. So I'm going to be generous. Sometimes they act out of generosity. Sometimes people act out of empathy. I feel the pain of that person. I know it might come at a cost to me, but it touches me deeply and I want to assist that person. So because I feel what they feel, I'm going to take action, right? So there's selflessness involved in that too. Sometimes people act, which again, they act to benefit others. They don't necessarily have a huge emotional connection to people. There's a general concept perhaps in their mind that there is a need to make the world better. And I don't have any personal knowledge of this person. I don't consider myself a hugely generous person, but I know the world needs to be a better place. And so I'm going to go ahead and act. And this may hurt me a little bit or take a little bit away from what I'm able to do, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to be selfless and I'm going to care about this situation or others more than I care about myself. So they act out through selflessness, right? And then again, sometimes people act sacrificially. I know I'm going to die, but I will save that person's life. They put it all on the line. So these are some of the instances where people weigh at what cost to you, at what benefit to me, and they take action. Questions? So be asking as you see people act within stories, where might they fall on that scale? Not everybody is evil, right? And not everybody is a hero. Usually people fall somewhere in the middle here. That's where most of our stories take place. When we have a story like this, it's highly motivating because we realize at what cost that comes. And if you have an ability to tell someone's story who does that, you're a lucky person. You know, those stories don't come around often. Realize them for what they are and make the most of them. Again, then always ask why a player is taking action. Why is the player taking the action they are taking? From what type of players they are, to what motivates players, to how they take action in response to that motivation, to what is motivating that action. If you ask why a player is taking action, you're getting to the core and the most difficult thing to understand often in stories. If you see an event happening in front of you, you can see what is happening, where it's happening, when it's happening, who's involved a lot of times, how it's taking place. But a lot of times you don't understand why it's happening. And everybody, when they sees that story, and almost any story, we always, for the most high stakes stories, we always as humans ask why. Why did it happen? Why did it have to be this way? Why did they do that? And that's the hardest thing to get at. So if you're always asking yourself, why is a player in a story taking this action in the manner they're taking, you will continually remind yourself to dig to a deeper level for stories and look to get to the core motivation of why a story is taking place. So as you do that, you're making your stories. And what makes a story? Stories are everywhere, right? And you've probably seen this in some of your courses or seen it in general, the 5 W's, right? What, where, when, who, why, and I add the how to it as well. So the 5 W's, you've seen these and they're in every journalism book and they work, they're great and they're easy to remember. You know, who, what, when, where, how. Who, what, when, where, why, how. So what? I mean, at a basic level, what's going on? I have my camera on and I'm recording and there's a house fire in front of me. That's pretty apparent. That's what's going on. A house is burning up. Where? It's happening at 311 South 17th Avenue. So the viewers, the where of any question, right, that a viewer asks is, how close is it to me? Because honestly, if you tell a viewer there's a gas leak, their ears open up and they get excited and they want to know, oh, wait, there's a gas leak? And then you say, in Oregon, they shut down. Okay, well, are people okay? What happened? What? But if you tell them there's a gas leak in the house next door, you need to get out and run. That's really motivating, right? So how close is it? Where is usually an issue of how close. And we'll reaffirm these elements later in the next slide too, with some specific story hooks. When? Is it now? Is it later? Or has it already happened? And if it's now and later, usually the viewer is asking, how can I prepare? The weather person comes on and says, Tuesday, the eye of this hurricane is going to come ashore. Okay, well, I got 48 hours to prepare. I'm going to nail some boards up on my windows. I'm going to pack my stuff and my dogs. I'm going to get my pictures and my keepsakes. I'm going to load up and I'm going to drive away from the beach till I get to higher ground. I have 48 hours to prepare, right? So what, where, when, who is it in the story? You know, who are the actors in the story? The players in the story. Sometimes it's the president. Sometimes it's the governor. Sometimes it's a policeman. Sometimes it is a demonstrator, right? Sometimes, and this is, you know, it's someone I know. Oh my goodness, that's Sally from my Bible study group. I didn't know she was into that as what that other thing too. So who is it? Is it someone I know? Is it someone in my circle? Is it a family member? Is it a loved one, right? And then how? You all have been engaged thus far in a lot of how stories. How to cook an egg, how to vacuum the floor, how to exercise, right? So people do want to know the details about exactly how does that work? How is that thing working that you're talking about? Now, are they going to vote on that Tuesday and that means my tax bill is going to go up on Wednesday, or is it going to go up 6 months from now? So the mechanics and the guts of getting inside of a story and breaking it up into smaller digestible pieces is very interesting to people because they want to know the details, and detail is what usually establishes a veteran reporter story or a more experienced reporter's or photojournalist story from a less experienced person's story, because a less experienced story might say about 24 people were involved, where a more experienced reporter knows if you can say 27 people and you've got an exact number, say the exact number. Don't round off, don't blunt. Details make your story razor sharp. So the details matter. Use the exact number if you know the exact number. Use the exact location. Don't say West Houston. Say, the Oakville Heights neighborhood in West Houston. Say the detail, right? And then again, I keep circling back to the why, because the why is the toughest thing to nail down a lot of times. Players don't want to reveal their motivations. Sometimes players don't even know their motivations. They act without knowledge or forethought. They act out of motivation. They act out of fear, and they honestly don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And so getting to the why of the story is sometimes a question you're not going to be able to answer. In the toughest stories, you just got to get as close to it as you can. So that should be where. Sorry about that. What makes a strong story, right? Remember, what makes a story? There's a lot of stories. There's a story about my Aunt Clara knitting a sweater. And I know Aunt Clara and I love her and I think she's awesome. And I think I might be interested in that story. And then the next time I get together with relatives at Thanksgiving, if I shot a story about that, I might play that story because there's 3 or 4 people in the family that have sweaters Aunt Clara knitted, right? If it's an awesome story, maybe other people might be interested in it, but chances are a wide number of people in the world would not be as interested in that story as a stronger story, right? Your stronger story, see this list and you'll notice similarities. This list right here is very similar to this list right here, the 5 W's. What, where, when, who, how, why. Relevance, proximity, timeliness, connection, understanding, purpose, and the added one here is emotion, right? So, and you're getting a copy of this deck. I'll email it to you, okay? So you'll have this. But relevance, okay, how big is the story, right? Is it a water leak and there's 2 gallons of water on 5th Avenue South in Columbus? Or is it a water main broke and it is completely, the pressure of the water main has cut a house in half and stranded the cat in the upper 2nd story window. And now they got to figure out how to cut the water off, get some of it out of the house and rescue the cat. A small leak, a gigantic leak, magnitude, right? Interest. People are fickle, they want to know the 10 best ways to lose 10 pounds in 10 days, right? So sometimes you have to take into account as you're making your decisions about stories and which ones to pursue and story pitches, you have to decide, well, I may love this because I just love astronomy, but nobody else cares. So I probably can't do this story for this TV station because relatively few people care about it. However, I'm gonna get these interviews. I'm gonna collect these pieces of video. I'm gonna grab this video. I'm going to collect the facts. And maybe the Astronomy Magazine and their website might be interested in this story because there's a niche there of people who are super tuned into astronomy, and I'm into it too. So interest, right? So magnitude and interest, that together brings relevance to the viewer. They weigh those things and they decide how interested am I in the story and how important is it to me. And again, remember where, proximity. And the basic question here is how close is it to me and is it going to kill me, right? Is it going to kill me, my family, or somebody I care about? Or is it going to, is it a danger to life or property? About me, to me, or the people I care, or my stuff that I pay good money for. So a hurricane's a good example. It could kill me, it could kill my family, it could kill my pets, it could destroy the beach house that I just spent my entire fortune on. So how close is it to me? It's a wildfire, it's gonna burn my house down. Oh no, that wildfire's in California. I live in Alabama, I'm cool, right? It's an incredible video. I'm sorry those people are going through that, but I'm not as interested in that because that fire is not about to burn my house down. Right? So when, timeliness. And in the context of stories, and the stories especially that we do, instead of now, it's live. I mean, is it happening right now? And do we have a way to get that video and that sound and put it on our website, social media, or TV live right now? So right now means live, right? Or will it happen soon? In an hour when we can put it up live, or will it happen tonight? So we're going to do a story about it and let people know this is happening. Or we also cover things that have happened. So did it happen just now, 2 minutes ago, 1 hour ago, earlier today? And the older that it gets, the less likely it is that we cover it, right? Because people usually turn to us for what's going on right now and what's relevant right now and how close is it to me right now, right? Connection. Who does it affect? Again, is it going to affect me? Is it going to affect someone I love? Is it going to affect someone I know? So that's the who, right? And who's involved? Is it someone I know? Is it me that's in this story? Is it someone I love? Is it someone I know? Understanding. That's where the how comes in. You know, how does this thing actually work? I'm not an expert at millage rates. I own a house, but I'm not an expert at millage rates. So if the millage rate's going up, how much will my tax bill go up next year? So sometimes the government or the entity or the individual you're covering will tell you something and they'll use their jargon. They'll use police speak, they'll use banker speak, they'll use government speak, you know, and then people who are not in government or not in law enforcement or not in banking, they don't understand what that person's saying. So in essence, you're acting as a reporter, but you're also acting as an interpreter. So you have to take the information that's gobbledygook for most people and nail it down and say, sales tax is increasing, so McDonald's fries cost you $1.10 last week, they're going to cost you $1.25 next week. People understand what that means. They don't understand what an increased, you know, percentage rate is on sales tax. You got to nail it down and give them something to look at. And it's not that people are dumb. It's just they don't speak banker. I don't speak banker. I don't speak a lot of different specialty languages. So you got to take the information you get from the specialist and make it universal to the general public, right? Emotion. This is a incredibly important thing. It is a rare thing. You never stage it. You never prompt it. You never goad it. You never abuse it. You never use people for the sake of it. But if someone welcomes you into their life and they're willing to share not only the what, but how it is affecting them, and sometimes when it affects them, their words fail them. And the only thing that will convey the magnitude of what this story is the emotion that they display. And that's universal. I don't need to know how to speak Spanish to realize that if I watch a story on Azteca television about a mudslide in Peru, and I see the mudslide, and I see people pulling people out of the mudslide, and I see them crying, I know what's going on. I don't have to understand Spanish. I know exactly what's happening in that story. And part of the success of that story is because people are sharing their most gut level reaction to something that is confronting them. And so capturing that in the moment and sharing that with viewers to show the high stakes of what's happening is something you should always be looking for in your stories. And then of course, there's the why, there's the higher purpose. What does this mean? You know, sometimes we ask a question like that, you know, like, I mean, in the case of the mudslide, there might be a why. They didn't maintain the dam. You know, some corrupt public official didn't maintain the dam. And so it got waterlogged and it wore away year after year for 20 years. And we had a big rain and suddenly it gave way. Mudslide killed a bunch of people. Sometimes there is no answer. It's not somebody did something wrong. It's, you know what, life overwhelmed us in this situation, and you know, it came at a cost to property and life. So, but you're always going for the why. Remember, you're always asking why, because you can get to the why sometimes, and that is the second or third or fourth question deep that a lot of other new reporters or photojournalists or visual storytellers, they're going to ask the first question. Tell me what happened. And they're going to get that sound, they're going to get that video, and they're going to walk away. And their story might be okay, right? But they're not going to ask that next question, which is just a little bit deeper. And then based on that, ask a third question and a fourth question until you're satisfied that you have gotten as deep as you can get. And if you ask 2 or 3 questions horizontally, which give you the basics, but then you dig 3 or 4 questions deep, you got 12 questions. Whereas your competitor who doesn't think to analyze a story and the components of the story, as I've outlined here in motivation, in internal conflict, if they're not thinking that, they're not asking those questions, and they go away and they have those top 3 questions, and they put their story together, and you've got 12 questions, and you got more information, number one, because you just asked more questions and you listened more carefully and you got the detail. Then you play your story side by side, and the other person, your competitor, doesn't understand why their story, they just know my story's not as good as his story. And they don't know why, because they haven't read through these slides and studied the coursework you've studied and done the work you're doing to get deeper on stories and honor, you know, that person that's letting you into their lives to tell their story, you know, to treat them with respect. So that's why your story can be better, because you ask 2 and 3 and 4 questions deep, not just this scratching the surface. And that helps you get to the why. Again, sorry about that. Should be what? What makes a strong visual story? So again, this kind of ties into what we're going through right now. And it sounds like a reminder, but remember, you're asking all these questions, you're considering all these motivations, you're questioning all these players who are in this story. And then you get to, how do I illustrate it? How do I tell it? And again, this is more mechanical at this point, but it's a reminder for what we're in the middle of right now, and it adds a few other elements to it. So your video, I mean, on a basic level, it's got to be clear. It's got to be in focus. It's got to be exposed correctly. It has to be framed correctly. Don't include anything in the frame that you don't want the viewer's eye to be attracted to. Eliminate distraction. So if you want to concentrate the viewer on the cutting of the carrot, I ought to see a hand, a knife, and a carrot, and nothing else. Take that lens right up in there, right? If you are doing a story about somebody working out, and when you want to illustrate how hard it is to work out, get that camera right up in their face so I can see the bead of sweat going down their forehead, and I can hear them excelling as they lift that weight, right? Action and the match cut of action. So you're practicing this right now as you put your sequences together. You have the person at the counter and they grab the knife and they go toward the carrot, and then you cut at the right moment to show the knife entering the frame and slicing the carrot. So match cutting action. The reaction that I mentioned, you know, how do you know what's going on in the internal dialogue of the subject of your story? Unless they tell you, the only way to get a hint at what's happening inside that person's head and heart is if you show their face, 2 eyes, 2 ears, and how they're reacting to whatever they're doing. Achieving a personal best as they exercise or run, you know, pulling that cake out of the oven and seeing how beautiful it is and see the smile on their face, like, yeah, I got it. I nailed it this time. This is going to be delicious. So reaction, it reveals what is not said. Emotion on someone's face reveals what is not said. Sequences, logic and flow. They're not choppy, they're fluid. That match cut action helps you get through and demonstrate a certain activity, and it adds up in a viewer's mind. Oh yeah, that's how the world works. You know, that's a logical thing. I don't see somebody pick up a, pen like this and then go like this, and suddenly it turns into a knife and I cut a carrot in half. You know, it's not illogical, it's logical. Specific point here to make, and this is what we engage in here at the station every day and try to remind people of. You gotta grab people's attention, and you gotta leave them feeling amazed and some kind of emotion. That's a strong story if you can do that, right? And one way to do that, since we tell visual stories, is you gotta knock them out with an opening shot. Your opening shot has got to be the absolute best piece of video you have, which instantly telegraphs what the main thesis of your story is. That's the shot you're shopping for. You're looking to pop someone right between the eyes with that opening shot. So if your story is about how hard it is to be an Olympic athlete, then that opening shot needs to be a shot of your athlete struggling to become awesome. It's got to instantly telegraph the dedication, the sweat, the drive that it takes to be an Olympic athlete. And then you back into other stuff. You show them cooking, cooking their food, and, nutrition's important, and, good coaching's important. So you show your coach interacting with them. But that opening shot has got to be just dynamite and just visually arresting. Like, wow. Same thing for the closing shot too. It's got to be something memorable. The last thing when people go to, you may have experienced this, right? I know my kids did. We went and visited a bunch of college campuses, right? And I asked my daughter, what's your favorite college campus you've visited so far? During that process, it was the last college we went to. Doesn't mean that in the end, when you sit down and you think about it dispassionately, and you add up the scholarship offers and add up the program and add up, all those things, that you may make a different decision. But right now, like when you're in the middle of it, the last thing that happened to you is usually the freshest thing in your mind. So that's the first thing that pops into your mind. So the last shot of a story should be as powerful as the first shot of a story. If you get the first shot and you just nail it, and you nail the last shot, then it helps everything in between, because people get knocked out and they stick with it, and then they remember it in a favorable way. Does that make sense? Take the lens where the viewer cannot go. There are certain things you guys are doing stories about which are very interesting. And if a viewer is not engaged in that kind of activity usually, then they don't know, because they're not in the middle of it, some of the unique perspective and angle and activity that occurs within that type of enterprise. And so if you can take the lens and put it in a place, like inside a refrigerator. Some of you guys did some of that. People don't really get inside of refrigerators and see what happens when the door closes, right? So it's a surprise, and it's novel, and it's like, oh, that's interesting, that's cool, I didn't expect that. And that goes into the next point, intrigue and surprise. If you can find something that's a little bit novel and a little bit different, to where the viewer might in that first moment expect one thing, and then suddenly the next action is revealed and it's something different, it's a pleasant surprise. And they're like, oh, that's cool. They see and they question, and boom, their question is fulfilled in the next second. So you have those moments, you get a couple of moments like that in the story, and you're drawing them through and you're engaging them, right? And just bottom line, whenever you're using the sound bites, whenever you're writing your tracks, if you say it, you need to see it. Say it, see it. 20 people gathered outside the county courthouse. I got to see those people. I don't want to see the street out in the front and the barricades, not letting more cars come into park. If you're saying 20 people gathered, show me the people. It sounds simple, but there are people that when they tell their stories, they get their video and then they get their track and their sound bites, and the video doesn't match what we're hearing. Say it, see it. When it comes to the audio, again, in a pure mechanical sense, clear, not distorted, and mixed evenly. When you play it back and you're listening, is the natural sound too high so it's drowning out your sound bite, or it's drowning out your voice track? You need to bring the level of that audio down a little bit, right? If you're wanting to point out something about, the mixer working, the chainsaw chop, cutting the tree, the violinist playing the violin, but the audio is not high enough to where I can't fully appreciate and enjoy that, then it's not successful. You have to monitor when you record it, make sure you're not pegging in the red, right? So it's clear and recorded properly. And then when you mix it, make sure whatever is intended to be highlighted at that moment is at the proper level. Same thing with audio. If the opening shot of your story can also be anchored with a very powerful nat sound burst of audio, oh my goodness, what a win. What a win, right? If you're showing me a house fire with gigantic lashing red flames and you hear the glass burst as the fire comes out of the window, huge win. It takes a person right into the action, right? So same concept with the closing shot, anchor that closing shot with some strong natural sound. And then periodically in the story, have these little nat sound bursts to get you from one place to another, or to anchor that next set of shots in the sequence. Same concept. Say it, see it, propel the story with interesting pieces of natural sound. And then intrigue and surprise. And specific to audio, a way you can momentarily create intrigue is you may have one sequence of someone chopping wood, and then he chops the wood, it falls, he picks it up, he throws it on the wood pile. And so the shot is of the wood pile, and a bunch of logs come in and go clank, 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 and fall on the wood pile. And for like a half a second, underneath the shot of the wood pile, you hear a chainsaw start up before you see it for like a half a second, and then you pop to the shot of the chainsaw. In that half a second underneath the wood pile, when you hear the chainsaw, the viewer goes, "What is that?" And then you instantly answer the question and take them to the next scene. So cheating in a little bit of audio underneath your previous shot is a good way to create that momentary intrigue and interest, and also have the viewer ask a question momentarily, and then you answer the question. That's immensely satisfying for someone. If you intrigue them and they're not quite sure, and then you answer the question right away with boom, it's a chainsaw. Oh, okay, cool. Let me see what the chainsaw is going to do. And then in your interviews, remember, you have your process sound bites, you have your motivation sound bites. So the process sound bites are what? Here's what I'm doing, here's how I'm doing it, right? And your motivation sound bite is why. Here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. So my recommendation again is take the process sound bites, the what, and put them underneath the video. So if the sound bite is talking about mixing the frosting, show me a sequence of mixing frosting. And then in the context of your stories, pop out at some place in the middle to show the subject's face, two eyes, two ears, for a motivation soundbite, and we'll get a little window into their motivation, their heart, and their soul when they reveal and give a little bit of an expression about why they get joy out of the activity that you're illustrating. So we've talked about story, the subjects or players or actors in stories, motivations in general for humans, what might motivate players in stories, how those players motivate or manifest that motivation into actions, what kinds of actions they might take, and then how those actions are captured in the interviews, in the video, and then the kinds of questions you should be asking to prepare for a story while you're in the middle of a story, and then when you're executing the story, to reveal not only the what in the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? There's who, what, when, where, how, but the why, and remembering that emotion is a key to peeking and behind the scenes and revealing what is not said. A player will unconsciously reveal the why of a story sometimes without knowing they're doing it and without even thinking about it. If you ask the right questions and you capture, you've seen those moments during a news conference perhaps, and you've seen someone talking and someone asks the question that everybody's thinking, and the words that come out of that speaker's mouth may say one thing, but you see the reaction on their face. You see that, you hear the tone of the way they respond, and you realize there's another piece of that story being revealed here. They're not saying it, but I'm seeing it, and they're revealing it. So that's extremely powerful. So as we move forward, video assignment 5, okay? I've seen some progress. Let's work the exact same rubric again. We're getting there. We're getting really close to really nailing this portion of it. So the next story is the exact same rubric, except instead of 2 sequences, 4 sequences. And honestly, most of you guys are doing that anyway already. You're giving me 4 or 5 or 6 sequences already, so it's not a big ask. Remember, knock me out with the opening shot, knock me out with the closing shot. Have a piece of Nats on the opening shot, have a piece of Nats on the closing shot. And remember, see it and say it. Some of the disconnect I see in some of the stories still is there's a disconnect between what the video is showing and what the person is saying, okay? So, you know, you're capturing the video, and just make your little mental, get a little notebook if you have to, say, I've got a really great sequence of someone mixing the frosting. I need to make sure to ask a specific question about frosting, the how of the frosting, and what kind of satisfaction do you get when it looks so fluffy and puffy and beautiful. So I know I've got incredible video of frosting. I've got a shop for a soundbite about frosting, right? So connecting the see it, say it with the SOTs. There are elements of all these things in here, and you're making excellent progress moving your craft forward with stories 3 and 4. I think we can put it over the top in a lot of ways. So do a similar video next week that you've done last week and this week. Add a few more sequences and concentrate on thinking, how am I going to knock the viewer out with the opening shot and closing shot, marry it to Nats, and really concentrate on marrying see it, say it. If I show it, I want to have some sort of support in the narration. And I'll get you your feedback about these latest stories in the next day or so. So good work and some good progress. And that is today's session. We are probably 2 or 3 minutes away from them cutting us off for the weather. So any quick questions before we wrap up today and exit? I hope you guys found some. Was the theory okay? Did it overwhelm you? Did I get too far into philosophy?
No, I thought it was super helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
And-
it made more sense when you broke it down today.
Good. I'm glad you're trying to help. So, and again, what I would say to you is there is some coursework where your instructors will go to that level of detail and grabbing some of those examples from classic story theory and are organizing them in a way like that for you and breaking it down. But my experience has been most often, if you're in a writing class or a storytelling class, you concentrate on the mechanics and the structure, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? But you don't go back to this idea of the players in the story and underlying motivations, which sometimes are prompted by things which the player doesn't even realize themselves. Remember, they act out of ignorance, they act out of emotion. And so if you realize that and you question why a player or an actor in a story, and when I say actor, I don't mean someone who's fictitious or playing a part. I mean just someone who's taking action in a story subject. If you always have that in the back of your mind, especially if you're doing enterprise stories that are original, unique, and are motivated by trying to land a good, hard, exclusive story, a lot of times that are about government. If you start asking about motivation, and most often that is money, power, ego, someone's trying to preserve their elected position, right? Why are some governments inefficient and don't take action? Because the players at the top of the governmental chain are not motivated by how great they make it for the people who are elected. You know what they're motivated by? Getting elected 2 years from now. So guess who gets undue influence in that process? The company that writes them $1 million check for their campaign. Not me and not you. That's a little bit of political, opinion on my part. but think about it. What is going to motivate a person to take action, and how do they define success? If success is getting elected again, then the actions they take will be different from, if I solve all my constituents' problems in Georgia and Alabama, then that will be success for me. Well, that may involve making some hard choices and making some people angry to fix some things. So you know what? I'm ambivalent to that. I'm just not going to act, because the risk to me means maybe not getting elected again. So instead, I'm just going to tread water here, and I'm going to spout a lot of yik yak, and I'm going to, so again, that's judgmental, but not everybody does that. But I'm saying, if you're looking for motivation, follow the money, ask who wins if this happens, and why might they be doing it. So good session. Think about it. If you got any questions, email me back. Again, rubric for next week is similar to last week and this week. Add a couple of sequences, but I'll email you the link to today's session along with the PowerPoint deck, so you can go through that and look at the last slide or two where it's and I'll put that in the body of the email too. It's a few more sequences. It is just knock me out and then knock your viewer out with your opening and closing shot. Marry that with nat sound, and really pay attention to the see it, say it, say it, see it. Link those two. If we do that, I think we're going to make really good progress over the next week in adding just that little bit more of grasp and strength, and then we'll move on after that. Does that sound fair to everybody? Awesome. Again,
Yes.
congratulations, Brian and Dale. Proud of you guys. Glad to have you in the class, and everybody else. Thanks for the great work this week.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we'll see you guys next week. And remember, we have a guest on Tuesday, and it's Mr. Rosenblum from thevj.com. So you may want to follow him on his channels and go to that Facebook group and see a little bit about what his career has been about. But I think he'll have some really good insight for you guys on how to tell stories and how to assemble stories, because a lot of what he says is very similar to what we've been learning so far in the class. So I think we're going to be at the point in the discussion right now where we'll be able to ask him some really strong questions and get some, what he'll be able to tell you at a more sophisticated level, perhaps from teaching 50,000 people how to tell stories visually. I think we'll hook into some of your questions because you've already been doing it for a month now. And so you can get another next level kind of value out of that. Okay. Bye guys. Have an awesome week.
Bye.